Hey everybody, welcome back to Grumpy Acres. Got Tag with us again this week. We're going to talk about the 28 Principles of Freedom, Principles 18 and 19, which deal with the Constitution. Um, we were talking before we started. 18 is pretty darn straightforward. It's anybody that's run a business or planned a military operation or done anything like that understands the concept. 19, there's a ton of stuff. So, Tag, you want to get started?
Well, yeah, I'll read it at least, right?
Okay. Principle
Okay.
19. The unalienable rights of the people are most likely to be preserved if principles of government are set forth in a written constitution.
Yeah. I mean, that's, like I said, pretty straightforward. Like growing a garden or anything else, if you know, put it on paper, put it down. I don't have a lot for this one, Garen. I think it's pretty easy to plan, right? Write
I
it
got
down.
I got two things on it. First, on how they got there. You realize that the Constitution was drafted in 116 days, 3 years after the Revolutionary War ended. It took them 116 days to create the Constitution. Um, fascinating that they were able to do it that quickly, in my mind,
Yeah.
with all the representatives there. But while I was doing research on it, have you ever heard of Shays Rebellion? Have you ever heard of that?
Huh.
I'm a history buff, and I had never heard of it before.
Yeah.
So Daniel Shay was a veteran of the Revolutionary War. He was at Bunker Hill. He was at most of the major battles throughout the war. And in what is it? From August 29th, 1786 to February 17th, 1787, which is when they were working on the Constitution, he led a revolt against the government in Massachusetts. He raised a militia and actually fought a battle for democracy against the United States of America. Um, the reason why they revolted was the veterans of the American Civil War or Revolutionary War were drafted. There were times they were not paid. They were not compensated for their efforts and all that. After the war was over, money was in short supply, like literal money was in short supply. And before the war, these farmers, most of these guys were rural farmers, and they had been extended lines of credit um, in order to do their farming every year. Well, after the war, the creditors in the lower river valley, the valley there in Massachusetts, quit extending these lines of credit and insisted that they pay in cash. Well, a lot of these guys couldn't do it, so the government seized their lands. They sold their cattle and their property off for way less than it was worth. So naturally, they got upset, and there was a preacher, Reverend Jedediah Peck. They called him Plow Jogger, and I had to look that up. It's actually kind of a neat term. It's literally somebody who jogs behind the plow when the mules are pulling the plow. But here's how he summed up the situation. I have been greatly abused and have been obligated to do more than my part in the war. Been loaded with class rates, town rates, provincial rates. That's what they call taxes. Continental rates and high people all rates. Been pulled and hauled by sheriffs, constables, and collectors, and had my cattle sold for less than they were worth. The great men are going to get all we have, and I think it's time for us to rise and put a stop to it and have no more courts, nor sheriffs, nor collectors, nor lawyers. Now that was a mere 2.5 years after the American Revolution that was happening in our country. And these men, they were getting thrown in debtor's prison. They were they were losing their land. Can you think of any modern equivalent to that?
A lot. I know a lot of people in my life and some super successful people run big, big businesses that complain and bitch and moan about, basically taxes and regulations, hinder them from being successful. So yeah, I can apply that to a lot of people I know.
Well, and Daniel Shay, if you go into his writings, there's a couple of compilations of him out there. Uh, he was a big proponent of democracy. He did not want a strong federal government, and as a result of this, the framers of the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, were specifically written to defend a strong federal government,
Mhm.
and that's what they used to create the Constitution. Now, his complaints were um, the taxes, the courts, the legal system. I mean, everything that the founding fathers had put into the Declaration of Independence were what he was fighting for, or fighting against, actually, what I should say. Not everything, but the big, there were like six big topics that he was for. And it's kind of funny how it everything repeats itself.
Mhm.
And the other thing about the Principle 18, nowhere in that, and nowhere in anything I can find talking about Principle 18 does it talk about a living document.
Mhm.
What's written is written.
Mhm.
And if, as a businessman, if somebody can arbitrarily change a contract,
Mhm.
is that good business for you?
Yeah, again, you've heard me say these words many, 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 many times. I run my businesses on three principles: fair, measurable, and objective. Right? Those are the principles by which I try to run, pretty much everything. And objective's the key word in that. Right? Well, they're all key, but anything that can be arbitrarily done is probably a bad thing.
Right, right. And I think that 18, the real takeaway point from 18 is anytime they're trying to change the Constitution.
Well,
Uh,
that's why the founders made it so hard to change it.
right,
I mean,
right.
they did that on purpose.
You know, so what is it? Article 5 is for the conventions of the state.
Hmm.
That, or uh, 2/3, they can
Yeah.
Congress can ratify it too.
Yeah.
Personally, at this point, I don't have faith in either one of those processes.
No.
I I, I really wish I could trust the convention of the states, but look how easily they can be corrupted. And
Yeah.
quite frankly, anytime they've amended the Constitution, but not anytime, most of the time they've amended the Constitution, it has not turned out well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
That's the
mean,
scary part about the Article 5. And I don't want to derail the conversation, but
no, go ahead.
with the Convention of States is what comes behind it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to change it, but now we're going to change it according to what and to who, and we're going to put these same Republicrats that have been in charge forever, that have got us to where we're at, deciding what the new Constitution should be. That's kind of a bad road.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, and that's probably that's ruffling feathers seems to be what I'm all about the past couple of days. Did you see my barbecue review?
No, I didn't, because I've been gone traveling. I just got home an hour ago, so
Talk
I've got a
talk
whole bunch to catch up on.
talk truthfully about barbecue, man, and I'm probably ruffled some feathers on both sides of that, and we're probably ruffling some feathers right now saying what we're saying about the convention of the states, but that's what these talks are about, right?
Yeah.
They're about being truthful about it.
Well,
Well,
I mean, I wouldn't mind the Convention of States so much if what the states were going to do is secede and keep a hold of the Constitution, all that. And so I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but I'm very fearful of what would come out of the backside of that.
okay, that's a good way of putting what I meant too.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
you 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 gave us a great segue into Article 9, or Principle 19. Uh,
Good.
the the states, the anything. Principle 19 is only limited and carefully defined powers should be delegated to the government, all other being retained by the people.
Yep.
And who are the people? The people are the citizens of the different states. And this one, I don't know about you, I was able to find a whole bunch of stuff on
Oh
this.
yeah.
The Article 1.8 contains
Hmm.
20 powers delegated to Congress. Article 1 is about the responsibilities of the president. And I didn't, I probably knew this in the past, but
Article 2.
is it Article 2? Oh, I'm sorry, I mistyped it.
Yeah,
But
you're
it
close.
delegates the responsibilities of the president. I forgot there were only six. My God, it's been so long since people did their jobs that, even, I mean, like I said last week, man, I had a really good civics teacher, and he drilled that into our heads with the point of a brown Navy shoe and a Annapolis ring. whenever we screwed up. And
Yeah.
I completely forgot about it. And then what was it, Article 3 is tells what the Supreme Court's supposed to
Yeah.
do.
The judicial.
Yeah, the judicial. And
Mhm.
my God,
Well,
I started looking
last
into
week
that.
when we did these videos, we were talking about the three, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branch.
Uh,
These Article 1, 2, and 3 defines the powers of those three branches.
right, right. Um, my gosh, getting into Article 3 and looking at the Supreme Court, man, you talk about going completely off the rails and not doing their job, and they for the most part haven't been doing it for a long time.
Yeah, you want to start with 3 or you want to start with
Well, no,
1.8?
let's start with one. I just had to say that because it was there and it was on my mind. But let's start with one. Go ahead and elucidate it on it.
You want to go through them?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so the first one is the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises to pay the debts and provide for the common defense, the general welfare of the United States, but all duties, imports, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. Yeah, and so I mean, to me, I think the key word in that whole sentence is uniformed.
Yeah. Um, Gee whiz. I like what's the what's the tax that was it Bush or Trump got rid of that they reinstated the salt tax
Hmm.
where people from states without high property taxes are literally subsidizing rich people in states that do have high property taxes.
Yeah,
Doesn't seem very uniform to me.
yeah, no, and I mean, you guys hear me bitch and moan about taxes all the time. I'm not anti-taxes. I mean, I think there's some things that the government absolutely has to do. And when we go through this, we'll talk about what they're supposed to be doing. The problem is their hands are in everything else.
Right.
You know, I mean, I want my country to have a strong military, right? As it says, and to provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. I'm all for that.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
And there's other things too. There's other things too that it collects tax for.
hmm
Post offices and post roads.
hmm
You realize those are the only that by the Constitution. I probably knew this back in the past, but it kind of shocked me. Those are the only roads that are authorized by the Constitution for the government to pay for, the federal government.
hmm
Man, that I guess you could wiggle that into post office or postal trucks drive on all the roads, so they're all they're
Yeah.
all constitutional roads.
Well, I really wish that a lot of these things that they would have went into a little more depth about them when they wrote about them, because it leaves it just so open. You know, just like number 2, it says to borrow money on the credit of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that we're great at this as a country.
Probably pretty darn close to best in the world.
Probably the best in the world, right? I don't know. There's a couple of them out there that might be a little better, but um, third one is to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes.
The Commerce Clause that Spags is always
hmm
always pointing out as being the root of all evil.
hmm Well, except I think I would counter with Spags that how do you deal with commerce, between countries? I mean, it's got to be a federal job, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, unless it laid in the hands of the state for whatever they were selling, but then would create a whole nother set of problems.
Right. Well, I think the issue is that they use the among several states. In my mind, they're talking about commerce with external, like across borders, but they use that to insinuate themselves into local
hmm
commerce
Yeah,
because my whatever I make may cross a border. And we live in Kansas, and the Kansas legislature made a law that said if you create a certain firearm part and you don't sell it across state lines, the federal government has no say over it.
yeah,
And we know what happened there.
yeah. Hey, I don't want to derail, but I caught word that there was how when you drive down the road and there's drug checkpoints?
Uh-huh.
There was one in Kansas that was a currency checkpoint.
Oh, hell no. Hell no.
I
Where'd
heard
you
that.
hear that?
Oh, I was over on Freesteading and someone was traveling through and said right just south of the capital city there was a drug and currency checkpoint.
A drug and what?
I've never heard of such a thing.
I have. What are they
I
checking?
don't know. I'm
Large
gonna do a little
sums of
digging on it.
money?
I'm guessing drug money. I don't have any idea, but I'll do a little checking on it.
Oh yeah, get me going on civil forfeiture. Oh man, there's a subject that'll get you going.
All
Yeah.
right. Number 4 says to establish an uniform rule of naturalization and uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcy. Yeah, and so that's interesting. So, what about the uniform rule of naturalization?
Our borders are secure.
You know
Man,
what? I think what's funny about it, about a lot of these, and all of these, really, we create these laws just like this one, to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. So let's just create the law. We just won't follow them.
yeah. Oh,
Laws are on the books.
Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania just this week, the Supreme Court ruled that they had to throw out all the ballots that were illegal on Pennsylvania law because they weren't dated.
Hmm.
And Governor Wolf and his administration basically said, "Nah, we're not going to follow that. We're going to
Yep.
count them."
Yep.
You know,
I tell people this in business all the time. You can make all of the processes and procedures you want, but if everybody doesn't follow them, it's worthless. Don't waste your time.
yep.
And
Yeah.
I think the same, applies here.
And in a corporate environment, you're literally trying to change the corporate culture.
Hmm.
And I think that holds true when you're talking about the legal system of the United States. We're trying to change an entire culture and get it
Hmm.
back to the way it should be instead of the way it is.
Yeah.
You
Next one says to coin money, regulate the value thereof and of foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures.
Okay. I'll give the governments, the modern governments, props on part of this. We're not on the metric system.
That's what you came up with in all of this?
I'm trying to find something positive here. I'm trying to say something positive because the rest of that, yeah, we don't do a very good job with that.
Yeah, you think the founding fathers would have envisioned the Federal Reserve?
Oh no, absolutely not. In fact, that whirring sound you hear in Boston is them rolling over in their graves,
Mhm.
or spinning in their graves.
Yeah. Because as
That
I understand it, the federal government does not coin money.
No, it doesn't. Federal Reserve, private entity.
Hmm.
You know,
Right.
and how many people actually know that? I know people that are watching this video probably know that, but the general public,
Mhm.
unless they're told that fact, they don't understand that. You know,
Yep. Next one is to provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the securities and current coin of the United States.
okay, this one, the Secret Service actually does a pretty good job of taking care of domestic counterfeiting. North Korea finances their government off of counterfeiting United States currency.
Hmm.
How much have they been punished? They're still doing it, even even
Hmm.
after even after Trump kind of put the little man in his place. They're still doing it. So we're do we say good job, but, or do we point out the fact that they're not doing anything, because all that counterfeit money hurts you and I and people like us.
So why did they choose to use the word current in that sentence? To me, that's a fascinating word.
To coin money and regulate. Okay, and the one I have doesn't say that.
Yeah, to provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the securities and current coin
Oh,
of the.
I was looking at the wrong one. Current coin. Probably because they knew it was going to change because it was such a volatile subject. I mean, gosh, at that point in time, each state had their own bank,
Mhm.
and there wasn't really a federal. When did the greenback come around, or the first federal? I think it was like the early 1800s before there was actually a United States currency other than the gold standard, or the gold.
Yeah, I'm looking right here. 1792.
Okay, I was off a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah. But and what does that do going forward?
Yeah,
Um,
that's what I was going to say. Does the word current mean that they foresaw, the rise and the fall of the dollar, or that other currencies would come in, or other coin in their word?
well, probably because the well, I guess technically the Confederate dollar was a separate country, a
Hmm.
foreign currency, wasn't it?
Hmm.
They had to have. They would not have said current if that wasn't the case.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. Okay,
And
next. I'm sorry, go ahead.
what happens? What happens? It says current coin. What happens when coin goes away? Because I'm sorry. A digital quote unquote coin is not a coin.
Mhm.
It's electronic bits.
Yeah.
It has even less value than the fiat paper dollar,
Mhm.
as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Because it literally holds no value
Mhm.
other than what people arbitrarily place upon it.
Mhm.
You know.
All
So
right. So next one says to establish post offices and post roads, and I think I agree. A post road is a, all the roads, right?
okay. But then what about raising taxes on that? That's a pretty big net they can use to scoop up money.
Hmm.
If you had somebody that was immoral,
Hmm.
let's say, and the people weren't electing moral people.
Now, you're not suggesting, G, that the Republicans are anything but moral, right?
Oh, what I say? I yes, I am. Yes, I am. I was really trying to find something sarcastic and funny to say, and I couldn't do it, man. This is impossible on that one. There's only one answer.
Yeah. All right. So back to the legislative branch, right? Which these are the laws that govern them, right? How they can
Mhm.
make laws, right? Next one is to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for a limited time the authors and inventors the exclusive rights to their respective writings and discoveries. It's the patent process, right?
The patent process, and I agree with that one. And
Hmm.
I think, for the most part, patent protection in the United States is not too terribly bad.
Hmm. Well, I think the only problem is, again, that's why I wish they would have expanded on these. So, like, for example, the word limited. What does that mean?
They expire.
Well, I understand they expire, but I know plenty of cases where um, the military has found a technology they really want and they just come take it, right? I mean, so limited could be a week, right? Could be a month, could be a year. It's arbitrary. That's what you
It's
guys
right.
talk about all the time.
Now, do you think that they meant it? Okay, how about do you think that they meant it to be arbitrary that way, or do you think they meant it in the fact that these discoveries should eventually become part of the public domain and not belong to certain individuals, to specific individuals in perpetuity?
Hmm.
I personally, I think that's the way they did it. And what you're talking about is a bastardization of the intent of what it was written for. I,
Well, I look at it from the perspective of the patent holder because, and as Garen, the last 3 years, I've been part of submitting 8 patents with over 200 claims, that we got back and won, as far as the patents go. And it's a big process. And if I know that I have to give that patent up in 5 years, nobody do it.
well, okay. Here's
Too
my
much
question
work.
to you. Here's my question to you about a patent
Hmm.
or a copyright or a patent. Let's do a copyright because it's easier. It's easier to envision. So I write a novel and I make all kinds of money off of it. Does my family, if if the intent of that is to get these into the public domain so everybody can benefit from them, does my family have the right to live off of my efforts in perpetuity in that respect? Now, if
Yes.
they take the money and do something else with it and make their own money, that I don't see any problem with that. But do you see a problem with
Well, but you're talking about a copyright, which is very different from a patent.
well, okay, well, a patent too,
Well,
Does your family own the patent, or do you own the patent?
yeah, well, yeah, technically the company owns it. Well,
Yeah. But 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 what's risen out of this are these multi-generational families like the
mhm,
Kennedys and the
mhm,
Gettys and all these people that are running our country now and influencing the future of our country that did nothing to earn their place, which
well, but the process of going through a patent and doing all of that's extensive, and I can tell you that I think it should go back to the public at some point, right? Because at some point someone patented the wheel,
mhm,
right? I mean, at some point it becomes such a commonplace, but I just think that it should go back to the people. But I just think the choice of the word limited in that was super interesting, and I wish they would have said for 20 years or something.
just set a time.
Set a time. I do.
Well, and I can see where that would make it easier. I can also see where the way they worded it allows it to be specific to each individual situation.
Allows it to be arbitrary.
Yeah, and well, technically, I guess you're right.
Mhm.
I mean, if you look at it that way, and don't think that I'm sitting here saying that families don't think that I'm sitting here saying that I don't have the right to pass my wealth on to my family,
Mhm.
okay? Because that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is these people, the outcome of the way it's been run is has hurt the country. That's
Mhm.
basically what I'm trying to say.
Mhm.
And the next one,
Yep. Okay. To constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court. So basically, just to set the lower courts.
yep.
Yep. Which they should agree that should be done.
And those are they're not talking about state courts, they're talking about federal courts there, right?
Right.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Next one's to define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the laws of nations.
Yeah, they did away with letters of marque after the Revolutionary War. So I could see in the beginning, and my Marine Corps rose to prominence during the Barbary Pirate Wars. In
Yeah, that's
fact, the United States, in fact, at the time, the United States was the only country in the world that stood up and said no to the Barbary pirates.
well,
So,
I think it's interesting where they talk about punishing piracies and felonies committed on the high sea, right? But they don't really go much into, somebody sells marijuana in Colorado. It's a state issue, but the feds could come in, I guess, and arrest people, right? I mean, they did it here in Kansas with the Kettler Cox case, right?
mhm.
But it doesn't really talk about that. Another
Well,
case of
but I think the reason for this one was because at the time, every single state, well, not every single, yeah, every single state in the nation except Maine was a seafaring state. So dealing,
Maine. Maine's not a seafaring state.
and not Maine, Vermont.
Pennsylvania.
I was one of those little tiny states up there.
Yeah.
Vermont doesn't have a seacoast. Um, I can't believe I said that.
I was gonna say Maine's like a lot of water, bud.
I know. Good catch, because I would have plowed right through that. You know, but I think that one's specific. I mean, it's pretty damn specific. They're talking about the high seas, and I can't see how. And it probably has been used to do what you talked about,
Mhm.
like the Cox case. It's probably been used for that, and
Mhm.
it shouldn't have been. You
Mhm.
know,
Okay, next says to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, and make rules concerning captures on land and water.
well, so they didn't get rid of the letters of marque with the Constitution. Maybe it was later. I know at some point they made it illegal for the United States government to issue letters of marque.
Hmm.
You know, but well, they kind of screwing the pooch on that one, aren't they?
Well, they're doing it on all of them. I mean, like I told you, you and I go over this, but it's really the exercise of cotton candy and fairy dust.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I think it's good going through these things and talking about the way it should be, because it's a reminder to people of exactly how far we've gone off course. And and I don't think it's unicorns and fairy dust. I think it's a very, very dramatic reminder to people that, hey, we need to start relearning this stuff, and we need to start practicing it, and or we're never going to get back. We're,
Well,
we're,
we're never
we're never going to get back.
not gonna get it back anyway. Um,
Well, someplace we will.
Here's one right up your alley. This will be a favorite one of you. To raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years.
Yep.
So basically, the legislative branch cannot fund, you know, money to armies for a period longer than 2 years.
Which is why the appropriations bills go through all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, and the whole purpose of that was we weren't supposed to have a standing army.
Mm-hmm.
It did say Navy, and the Marine Corps was part of the charter there. So that's the next one. I just got to say. So they're talking about armies. They're not talking specifically in modern time. They're specifically talking about the Air Force and the Army there.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, they've kind of. How much do we spend on defense every year? And
Yeah.
how many long-standing defense contracts do we have that go way beyond 2 years? So that tells me that people expect the money to be appropriated for a lot longer than 2 years.
Yeah, I can't think of a single war we've ever been in where the money was appropriated for less than 2 years.
Right.
Oh no, that's not true. Probably the Gulf War, the first Gulf War.
The war 1812.
Hmm.
They were still following it. It wasn't. It was a. I don't know the Mexican War. I don't know if they were there. I know by the time that the Civil War rolled around, they got rid of the 1 year contracts, and were by the end of the war they were telling people they were in for the duration. You know, so but yeah, I agree with raising money to support armies because we have to be able to defend ourselves. Um, should it have gotten to the point it is now? Absolutely not. And that's from somebody who's a big supporter of the military.
Hmm.
You know, and then the next one. Go ahead
Next
and
one says to provide and maintain a navy, and nowhere in there does it mention the Marines. Gee.
the Marine Corps is mentioned in the Navy Charter,
Mm-hmm.
but and then Congress did pass uh, prior to well, actually the Marine Corps predates the Army. It actually predates the Continental the Declaration of Independence and all that stuff. So the Marine Corps is in. I'm just saying, there's a reason why we're the best. Okay.
It don't say
Hey, guess what today is?
what.
Today is the Navy birthday.
Okay, I thought it was Happy Farmers Day.
It may be that too.
Mm-hmm.
I posted something on Freesteading saying happy birthday to all the rust pickers out there. So, told them that we give them a hard time, but we couldn't get anywhere unless they drove the boats.
Mm. All right, how about to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces? That's pretty much the same as the other one, other than it does mention land. So
yeah. And then the next,
and that's interesting because that would also insinuate they wanted a standing army.
well, it I don't know. It seems to me if the idea is to not have a standing army, but understanding you have to have an army during times of war, it seems to me that you'd want to have rules for how it's regulated and how it's raised, how it's trained, how it's used, how it's disbanded. You know,
Maybe they just wanted forces for those landlocked states like Maine.
like yeah, exactly like Maine. You're never going to let that one go, are you?
Yeah, no, that's gonna be fun, man. I'll play with that one for the next year. Okay, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions.
Militia, not the army, the militia.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, the militia were the people of the states. Everybody in the state that was able-bodied was part of the militia.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus, isn't there? Gosh, one of the amendments talks about that, doesn't it? Talks about a well-regulated militia.
Mhm.
Huh. Huh. It doesn't say anything about armies there
Nope.
in that one. Interesting. Hey, took a quick break and we're back. Tag, something occurred to me while we were offline. Um, I think this conversation illustrates something very important about the original intent of the founding fathers. As times change, the meanings and the ideas behind words change with society, and
Yep.
and you're saying we're talking about these, and you're making comments about them in modern context, and I
Yeah.
and I think it really illustrates how important it is that we have people in the Supreme Court and people in government that are originalists, that read the Constitution and read the laws in context of the way they were originally written and not what they mean now. Because it's easy to change words. I mean, we've seen that. We've
Mhm.
seen that multiple times in very meaningful ways in this country. They changed the definition of marriage. They changed the definition of a vaccine. They've
Assault rifle.
exactly.
Yeah.
And if they can manipulate words like that, then they can change the meaning, and we end up with a living document. You
Yeah.
know, and I think I think we stumbled across something very important in this conversation, that if
Well,
anybody walks away with anything, that's really something to walk away with from this.
well, I think I would add to that too, which I think it's about reading it and just trying to, because I mean, to me, the problem with a lot of documents like this, and even into the level of like the Bible, is that there's a lot of room for interpretation. How do you read what is said? How do you interpret it? Because of the way that it's written. And so I think by educating yourself and spending some time reading about these kinds of things and just kind of where they came from, and I think helps you kind of understand, that mind frame back then. And so I would encourage everybody just to go read,
Yeah, read it,
just educate yourself.
and try to look at it from the viewpoint of the original audience it was written for. The
Mm-hmm.
Bible wasn't the the Bible was written for everybody, but the
Mm-hmm.
target audience when it was written was the first century Christian.
Yeah, but I can tell you just personally, reading anytime I get a chance and I'm reading the Bible or reading a scripture, much like the Constitution, I find myself trying to interpret what they meant,
Right.
trying from my perception, trying to understand exactly what's being said there, because none of us were alive when they wrote the Constitution or the Bible, for that matter.
Exactly.
You know.
And we need to read beyond the specific work. We need to read
Mm-hmm.
all the other things, that the Federalist Papers, all the essays, all that stuff, so that we understand where they were coming from,
Mm-hmm.
and we
Yeah,
understand.
because this document that we're talking about, the Constitution, is the final draft of many, 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 many conversations.
Mhm.
You
Exactly.
know. All right,
Okay.
let me keep reading.
So yeah, go ahead. We've only got a
Oh,
couple more, three
yep,
more.
just a couple more. Yep, it says to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states respectively the appointment of its officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress.
Hmm. And do you know who appoints officers to the Army now?
The, well, to the
Congress.
Army.
Well, any military, any officer in the federal military, DoD.
Yeah, this is talking about the militia,
Well,
right?
I know, but the but it also, it says appoint the officers.
Mm-hmm.
The federal government has usurped that that uh, that duty of the states. They've usurped that, and any officer that's serving in the federal army is appointed by Congress. They serve at the pleasure of the president and the Congress,
Yeah,
which completely changes the dynamics and the relationship there.
yeah.
Prior to the Civil War, um, if you asked an army officer, and they were all in the same army, if you asked an army officer, you know, who he was a Virginian, he was a Pennsylvanian, He was a Mainer, whatever they call people from Maine, a Vermonter. They were a Georgian. Now they're U.S. Army officers.
Mhm.
Well, people, and it's not just Army officers; it's everybody. Everybody looks at themselves as somebody that belongs to something more than their state. And I've always been a Missouri boy, and I always will be. I love the United States, but I love my state probably more. So,
What I think is interesting about this statement is, how like last week we talked about how the three branches of government, and they're all kind of beholden to each other. They kind of need somebody else in there, and I think that that's duplicated throughout the process. And in this one, it talks about how the federal government is there for disciplining the militia, but the appointment of the officers is a state duty,
right.
kind of to the same level of having to kind of play ball together in order to make it work.
Now the question that arises in my mind with this one specifically is the arming and disciplining of the militia. Are they talking about during federalization of the militia, whenever the militia is called up to serve the federal government, or are they talking about when times of peace back then, when the militia belonged to the state and the governor was the commander in chief of the militia for all practical purposes? You know, I don't know. I would have to
Yeah,
do.
this I was always under the belief that the states called up the militia, that was a state role, not a federal role. But I think this,
The well, and but you look at the way wars were fought. The states would call them up, and then those troops would be federalized, and they would fall underneath the federal government as an army. And the and
except this,
it
except
still
this
kind of holds
plan.
that way it still kind of holds that way with the National Guard, although because the federal government has such a good tight hold on the purse strings, governors don't get as much say as what they should have, in my opinion.
Well, but according to this right here, it says to provide for organizing. That's to call up, right? So to call up, to arm, and to discipline the militia is the federal government's duty. The state's duty is to appoint the officers and the authority of training.
I'm gonna have to look. I'm gonna have to do more reading on that because it's a very interesting.
Interesting. Yeah.
I've never really delved into that very much, and it's a very interesting topic, and there's a lot of meat there that could probably be its own hour-long conversation.
Yeah. You go on to the next one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. To exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding a 10-mile square as may by secession of particular states and the acceptance of Congress become the seat of the government of the United States, and to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be for the erection of ports, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. And that's another paragraph, but I'll go ahead. And to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof.
Yeah. Um, how big is Fort Riley?
Yeah, right. And Fort Riley's a little base.
Yeah, Fort Riley is one of the smaller ones
Go down to like Fort Hood, Texas, or something.
yeah. Um, you weigh that against the needs. Um, I honestly don't know what to say about this one. Seriously.
Yeah, well, I mean,
If I'm
they
a,
just, it's like
if
all
I'm
the
a
rest of them.
constitutionalist, I'm like, yeah, this one's being violated very egregiously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, they all are.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know well, and I think what's interesting, what this is really talking about, is what's the power of the legislative branch, not what's the power of the federal government.
Right, right.
Right, this is just talking about the legislative branch.
Well, I know, but the what the legislative branch is supposed to do and what it has allowed to happen are
Mm-hmm.
two totally separate things.
Yeah.
And by extension, they've usurped the power of the people and given it to the federal government.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it is. That's why anytime I start talking about it, I start talking about the federal government, because
Mm-hmm.
that's where the power ultimately ends up. You know, it
Yeah.
it, it, it flows out of our hands and into theirs.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And you want to do section 2 now? We've been through all
Yeah,
sections.
yeah. Let's do section two. I mean, you've already got me on a downhill slide emotionally tonight. Anyway, let's let's go full bore into it, man.
Go full
Seriously.
Monty. All right. So section 2 deals with the duties of the president, right?
Right.
And so there's really four. I know there's six of them, but there's really four main ones. So the commander in chief of the armed forces and state militias when called to duty for the United States.
Mm-hmm.
See, this is interesting. The very first one, going back to the ones we talked about before, it says again here the word called, right? The commander in chief of the armed forces and state militias when called, right? I think that's interesting because who calls, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I really believed prior to this conversation, or researching prior to this conversation tonight, that it was the states that called it up. And I want to read that too a little bit more, but interesting. The power to grant pardons and reprieves for offenses against the United States, including impeachments. Or excluding, I'm sorry, excluding impeachments.
Excluding impeachments. You know, that could very easily turn into political favors, couldn't it?
Well, I mean, why is it that all of the pardons and stuff that typically go on are right at the end of a term?
Yeah, because they don't have to deal with it.
Right.
You know, unless
But
there's
they're not
there,
pandering for votes.
there's some that happen in the middle of their term, but these are ones that are just egregiously bad
Mm-hmm.
that everybody agrees is needs to be overturned. You
Yeah.
know, yeah, but like Puerto Rican terrorists and uh, uh, traitors in Afghanistan,
Yeah.
all that stuff ends up being the last thing as they walk out the door. It's
Yeah.
like they take all their dirty laundry and just throw it all over the country.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they say, hey, all my political allies who got jailed for all the crooked stuff the Republicans do,
Mm-hmm.
and on their way out, they'll make it right.
Right.
Next one says the right to make treaties with the consent of the Senate.
Gee whiz. And yet here we are going back into, did they ever ratify the Paris Accords?
I don't know.
Did Congress? I don't think Congress ever ratified the Paris Accords yet. Here we are getting thrust into that uh, full force to the detriment of the country. And does that also apply to the UN? Is that a foreign power, even though we're a member?
Well, I think treaties is an interesting word there. I mean, that could be anything. I mean, that could be how they're recruiting, Taliban fighters to go fight in the Ukraine now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they have the right to make that treaty, I guess.
Oh, not just Taliban, ISIS and Al Qaeda
Mm-hmm.
are ending up in Ukraine. I saw that article this morning about
Yeah.
Jaw almost hit the floor.
Yeah.
But
And then the appointment of ambassadors, counselors, Supreme Court judges, and all officers of the United States government with the consent of the Senate. So basically, it's cabinet, Supreme Court judges, those kind of things.
and he's not allowed to do it. He's not allowed to do it without Congress approving of it, which I find and both sides are guilty of this. The recess appointments that end up being permanent because they can never agree on actually voting for them. That's the legislature just abdicating its duties, as far as I'm concerned.
Yep. So you want to do the three sections of Section 3?
Yeah, I'm going to let you drive that one because there's so much there. I'm not even sure. I started reading it and I was like, man, there's a whole lot here that is just a lot of legalese.
Well, I think what's important to know, though, is that Article 1, 2, and 3, Article 1 is about the legislative branch, Article 2 is about the executive branch, and Article 3 is about the judicial branch, right?
Right.
As we talked about last week, the three sections of government, these are just basically the rules in which they're supposed to go. But so Section 1 says the judicial power of the federal government is vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may, from time to time, ordain and establish. Section 1, Article 3 establishes that judges shall hold their office as long as they demonstrate good behavior. It does not, however, specify what good behavior is, which I find interesting. This is why, again, we talked about how everything's left to an interpretation, and it becomes kind of arbitrary, which I think is kind of the downfall of a lot of what's in the Constitution in a lot of ways.
Here's a question for you. In what you're reading, is behavior capitalized?
No.
No. Okay, so it must just be the. I'm gonna have to look it up and see what the original
Mm-hmm.
the original Article 3 says. Because if it's capitalized, doesn't that change the meaning? And it gives it more prominence.
Yeah, and it finishes out by saying, it does not, however, specify what good behavior is. The federal judges shall be compensated for their services, and their compensation shall not be lowered during their term of service.
So
Yeah, and this one's really interesting to me. So why do you suppose, G, that they wanted judges? You know, they limited the House and the Senate. They limited the president to terms, right?
mm-hmm.
Why did they want the judges to hold office as long as they demonstrated good behavior? So basically, for life.
Probably so that they would not be beholden to one specific party.
Yep.
That's the only
I
life.
also thought it probably protected them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, tried to keep politics out of it. I wrote down a quote on this. Let me see here. Yeah, Hamilton said that the judicial branch was the least dangerous branch because it had neither purse or sword.
Right. Yep. Well, and the scary part about that is recently certain political people have been talking about impeaching Supreme Court judges because they don't like the way they ruled.
Mm.
No.
Yeah, well, this is the problem with the word good behavior.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? So good behavior is to be determined by whom? By what definition are we using good behavior?
Well, I'm gonna say in this context, probably whatever the moral standards of the time were.
Mm-hmm. No, but I'm more referring to how that reflects today. Is it two wolves and a sheep talking about what's for dinner?
Realistically, or unicorn?
No, I mean it is.
Yeah, it is.
This is why they talk about impeaching them because they don't like their behavior, their good behavior as it's outlined in these principles.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be interesting if they would have put a word in there as long as they demonstrate moral behavior? Like if they would have changed that word and did they put good behavior on purpose? You would think they did, but
Well, again, that goes back to the original, the original context. I mean, we can put our ideas on top of it and try to figure out what it is, but unless we can find something that talks about what they meant by good behavior, we're just making suppositions.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and nobody will know because again, we weren't there. So again, it's left to interpretation.
Right.
Section 2 says the Supreme Court holds its original jurisdiction in cases affecting ambassadors, public officials, and individual states. In all other cases, the Supreme Court has appellate jurisdiction, which means they only hear cases that have been decided at the lower level and have been appealed. All crimes shall be tried by a jury and shall be held in the state where the crime was alleged. What I think what's interesting about this is, so it's really what it's really saying is that the Supreme Court is really there for national cases.
Right.
But that's its role is to decide them. And another thing that's interesting about here is nowhere in here or anywhere does it, well, in the Federalist Papers it talks about it a little bit, but talks about judicial review. You know how, Congress makes a law, is it constitutional? They really have no obligation in reference to the Constitution to determine whether or not that law is constitutional unless it's brought before them in a case.
Mm-hmm.
Which I find super fascinating.
Well, and then that leads to legislation from the bench.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where that whole thing goes to. Yeah, it is. It's like I said, there's a lot of meat here, and I just Uh, I wish I understood it in a more comprehensive manner. You know what I mean?
I think one of the brilliance of this of Section 2 is the part talking about the jury, and I think it's one of the things that make our Constitution special is that you have a right to be heard by your peers,
Hmm.
and that every case has that right, and that actually is a very effective checks and balances against a tyrannical government. If
Right.
you get to be heard by your peers, right, in your community, not just anybody, but in your community, I think that's one of the beautiful things that they were gave us through the Constitution.
Well, and one of the things that comes out of that I personally think is way underused in this country by juries is jury nullification.
Mhm.
The 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 laws are the laws are neither good nor bad. The laws are the laws, and it's the morals behind the laws that are good or bad. And the being having our peers adjudicate these cases, um, allows them if they want to say, you know what, we don't agree with this, not guilty, or
Mhm.
the law's gonna it could it go the other way? Because jury nullification,
No,
it can't.
no, it can't. Because they're given you ever served your jury duty?
Yeah, be honest with you, I've done it once my entire life.
Okay. Yeah, do they go out of their way to talk about how this is not a matter of your opinion? You're supposed to, judge this case against the law. Whether or not you agree with the law, was the law violated? You know, and so they really go out of their way to say, hey, you take your personal opinion out of it, and according to the way us politicians wrote this, did the defendant, is the defendant guilty?
Well, see, and yes, I remember having that discussion because
Hmm.
I was very adamant. I was like, if they don't, I don't care what the law says. If they don't, if the government does not prove their case, I'm going to say he's not guilty.
Yeah, well, I think this is a great example of the places we can starve the beast and a way we can begin to take things back. If you serve on jury duty, it is what the person did immoral. Did they, violate the rights of somebody else?
Mhm.
Forget about what the words say, right? And vote that way, stand up that way. I mean, I think that's a great way to go in there and say, I don't think what this person did is wrong, regardless of what your, scribbles on a notepad, Republicrats said it was.
Mhm. No, and like I said, I think that's completely underused in our country in modern
Hmm.
times. And if any time we need something like that, it's probably now.
Yeah, probably now. All
Probably
right,
now.
you ready for the last one, section 3?
Yeah.
Yeah, this will be a good one. Section 3 of the article sets forth the penalty for treason. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of 2 witnesses to the same overt act or on confession in an open court. Section 3 also gives Congress power to enact laws for the punishment of treason and limits the punishment to include only the responsible individual. There's a lot in this one.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, I like this one a whole lot. I think, but again, we get into these crazy interpretations. So, it says shall consist only in levying war against them, or adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. So again, you're talking about what's the definition of that. Remember the movie Patriot with Mel Gibson? Remember when he was helping both soldiers? He was helping both sides. They were laying on his porch, and he was trying to render aid to the
Mhm.
wounded soldiers. So I guess technically he could be treasonous,
Right.
right? I
I,
think the cool part about this is no person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of 2 witnesses from the same overt act.
yeah.
So you'd have to have 2 people stand up on there and say that, which I'll guarantee you they don't use. Um, and then
Well,
the other one, the thing that's interesting, I think, is when it talks about the punishment to include only the responsible individual. Because back in the England and back even in the medieval days, something you did, your kids could be punished.
right.
Your kids as kids could be punished.
Well, it happens. It happens in North Korea all the time. I mean,
Hmm.
their standing order is you punish 3 generations.
Mm-hmm.
of the family, that because they want to wipe out any possibility that the people
Yeah.
that are left over will rise up against the government. You
Yeah.
know, this one this one needs to be discussed more in public because the word treason is bandied about by people left and right and just used in the completely wrong way. People have no idea what treason is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so bad. It's, I don't care what anybody says. Jane Fonda committed treason. When you're sitting in an anti-aircraft gun, wearing a North Vietnamese helmet, doing propaganda, that's treason,
Mm-hmm.
especially whenever they're killing American citizens. You know, there
Yeah,
are,
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, can you make an argument that she was giving aid and comfort?
yes, I
No.
think it's how by helping them with propaganda because the propaganda that she spewed over there
Mm-hmm.
influenced opinions against the war here and against the war effort. Now, I'm not talking about the morality of the Vietnam War. I'm not talking about any of that. All I'm saying is what she did during time of conflict was treason.
Mm-hmm.
You
Now,
know,
my dad is now passed, but he was a Vietnam vet.
mm-hmm.
And he would say the same thing, but I find it interesting that if you put the shoe on the other foot, and let's say our country got into some civil war or something like that, and you were out in a field sharing a burger with somebody who was a rebel or whatever it was, does that make you treasonous?
Well, depends on which side of the coin you're on.
Well, to one side you certainly would be, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. You have to, the victors write the history. So if the side that I supported lost, then I would be treasonous.
Mm-hmm.
Now the question is, you raise a great point.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if if the if the if the government of the United States or any government, let's not just the United States, let's just say you're a citizen of a nation, and the government becomes tyrannical, and it starts veering off course from the original founding ideas and the documents, and they don't follow the laws, and it becomes a lawless state that is ruled by men and not by laws. If you if you take up arms against that government to put things right and get things back to the way they're supposed to be, does that does that make you treasonous against the country, or does that make you treasonous against the government?
Mm-hmm. So did Jane Fonda pick up arms?
Yeah, I'd say when you're sitting on an anti-aircraft gun, swiveling it around, yeah, that's kind of picking up an arm.
Gee, I think my point is that's a slippery slope.
No, it
That is
is.
a
I'm not gonna lie.
slippery slope.
It's a slippery slope, But the point I'm trying to make is that as patriots, and as American citizens, we have a duty. We could have a duty as part of our birthright to try to get things back on track. You
Yeah.
know, and
Well,
and
again, I think that's just a slippery slope because by whose definition is back on track? And I just think it's very, very easy the way that this was written to point to somebody being treasonous. I talk all the time about starving the beast and those kind of things, and yet I love my country. I fought for my country and would again, and I love everything that America stood for and what it is. I just don't happen to like the way things are today, and I wish her no harm.
well, I'm going to tell you right now. I'm going to tell you right now that eventually, the way things are going, people like you and I that are have a message of violence is not the answer. That we are looking for these alternative uh,
Hmm.
economies and such. Eventually, the government will consider that treasonous, and they will come after people like us. And I don't think it's going to happen in our lifetime, um, but eventually it will happen.
Yeah, goodness, I hope not, because I don't think you guys have heard me say a million times, violence it's not going to solve anything. It just makes them more powerful. That's all it does.
Well, history shows that violence is the answer sometimes. You know,
Yeah, I'm not even going to touch that one.
you don't have to. You don't have to.
I'm not going to.
I'm sitting here looking at my library, and I've got several books about guerrilla warfare and revolutions. Part of my RTC stuff. It's part of the stuff we had to do when I was in RTC. So yes, um, revolutions that use violence are a legitimate form of politics, or their extension of politics, I should say. You know, so and one thing I will say, and everybody take note of this because this is absolutely true. No revolution has ever succeeded in the history of man when it's based solely on anger and hate.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to be a revolutionary, you need to take those two human traits and push them to the side, and you need to come up with workable solutions that are positive. All right. That doesn't that doesn't mean that eventually violence may not, violence may be the answer one day. It does not preclude that. It just says that you have to come up with something that is not based on anger and hate, or you will fail.
I
Here,
would say the best thing we could do is lose our emotional attachment to money.
right. There's my statement for prosperity tonight. So
Mm-hmm.
50 years from now, whenever they're going through old YouTube videos, if somebody has articles, they find that they can go. I don't know, man. It's just this whole conversation is a fantastic conversation, and I think going through it and giving people a peek at the way things should be and contrasting against the way they are, I think is very important. I think it's an important part of the process, because you can't if you don't know what's broken, you can't fix it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how many of these people we're not teaching a PhD course here. I've said it before, and I'll say it anytime the topic comes up. Man, these guys that do deep dives in the Constitution and they start talking about all these archaic ideas from the mid 18th or 19th century and how we need to get back to them. And that's a PhD course. All right. You don't teach a PhD course to grade schoolers, high schoolers, college kids, well, college kids, maybe not freshmen in college at the very least, so we have to start at some base level and get some understanding before we can move on to the next step and figuring out a way to write the boat and get the boat pointed in the proper direction. You know what I mean?
Well, I think the first thing we do is read, like I was talking about earlier. If we, go read the 28 Principles of Liberty and see what it means to you. Read the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights and the Federalist Papers, and just go educate yourself and see what you get out of them. I mean, for me, this series isn't so much about teaching anything. It's because I'm learning too. I mean, just like the whole thing we talked about, who calls up the militia? Now I have a question in my mind, even though my whole life I believed it to be one way. I'm gonna have to go research, but I'm learning through this process too, and then I get to hang out with my buddy and talk for an hour on a Thursday night.
Yeah. And
But
I don't think we're teaching anybody anything. I think we're sharing our experience.
yeah,
And folks, if you're out there and you've got a comment on this, man, put it down there. That's one of the things that bothers me about this whole series so far is very few people are engaging in the conversation.
mm-hmm.
And we put the call out a month ago that if anybody wants to come on the panel with us to
Mm-hmm.
contact either Tag and I, we'll get you on board. There's very only rule is, as far as I'm concerned, is you got to be civil.
Right, fine.
There's no being nasty, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't had anybody take us up on that, and I guess it's personally my fault because I haven't been pushing it. Maybe I'll start pushing a little bit harder, see if we can get some people to come up
Mm-hmm.
off the street to give their opinions about it. And I know people out there have got the opinions. I see them talk all over the place, but they're not.
You know what though, G? The flip side of that is that at the very worst that happens in all of this is just like how people get together for a Bible study. You and I get together for a freedom study.
Oh yeah.
It's cool.
Oh, I'm
It's cool.
walking away from this. I'm walking away from this way more knowledgeable than I was coming in.
Yeah.
Seriously. Yeah.
Yeah.
And at the risk of sounding egotistical, thought I was pretty dialed in on this whole subject, but there's a lot of stuff that I'm weak on that I need to brush up on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's cool. I look forward to doing the next couple.
It's funny you mentioned reading. Well, before we go on, yeah, I pretty good stopping place. I mean, we're
Yeah.
running out of time. We got several minutes that we can talk about what's going on right in our lives, But unless you've got anything else to say about it, it's kind of funny that you mentioned reading because I was thinking today I'm going to do a video sometime in the next week or two about building your library,
Hmm.
building a physical library. Uh, just had some things happen in the last month or two, and done some things over the past couple of years that have gotten me some really good books, really inexpensively. And
Hmm.
I want to share that with other people so that they can start building their library too. Because I'm an avid reader. I haven't the last year and a half since this whole moving ordeal started. I have not read nearly as much as I've wanted to or I normally do, and it's driving me bonkers because I'm looking. I've got a whole bunch of books on my shelf right here that I haven't read yet.
You know what's funny is when you said that about you're looking at your books, I looked around on my desk and I have two books on my desk right now. One's a human resource manual, and the other one's an electromagnetic pulse testing result.
Ooh, talk about dry.
I know, right? I gotta get a grip of life, man. I gotta find something better to read, right?
Now, in all your pods, did you set aside a place for a library?
Oh yeah, we have a huge library.
Oh yeah.
Huge. When we would go to remember when the Mother Earth News Fair was here? So one of our goals every year was to try to add 10 books. So every year would come around and we'd pick up making cheese or making bread or just whatever the book was. And that's where I got a lot of the, where there is no doctor, where there is no dentist, Encyclopedia of Country Living. I mean, these are all the icons, the LDS manual, all of the stuff that I would say is a critical book. But you should do a series on that. What are the top 10 books that you'd want to put in your library? Because I could come up with 10 easy.
Oh
That'd
yeah.
be right at the top of my list. But I need to get business books out from underneath my nose and do some more reading about, growing a chicken.
Yep. Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
I'm guilty.
So we know what you did last weekend, which I commented on the video you put up. I had a blast. I had a really good day. The only down thing was trying to my two heart attack heart and my overweight body to hanging with those young kids. Young kids, they're
See, I think,
late 30s.
it's funny you say that, but to me, that was one of the highlights of the day.
Dude, it sucked not being able to hang with them.
Well, except that here's the thing, though, G, is that I got to watch you push yourself through that. We got to bond on that level, and I really appreciated it. You made those couple comments to me about, man, it's hard to hang with these young bucks. It actually made me smile because you did hang with them.
Nah, I
You know?
petered off. I hit the wall. I hit a second wall, and about an hour and a half before we quit, I petered off, and I did a last sprint right before
Yeah.
we called it quits, and was moving wood to the splitter and stuff, just doing that so I could say, okay, I'm 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 at least doing this right now.
Yeah. Well, this weekend we'll be at your farm putting up some wood.
And
And
I'm trying my best to get everything set up. I cut trails. I went out. I scouted out trees. I cut some trees up, and I'm going to try to move them all. I'm not going to pull them all up onto the front of the property. They're going to be on the back of the property, just because moving them is going to be a pain in the butt if they're not cut into rounds. Um, I found a 150-foot cottonwood tree that we're going to cut down and film it, which is going to be really cool.
yeah.
That
Well,
thing,
you got it. We've set quite a big standard. You got to now set the bar higher.
dude, there's no way. I don't even have that much wood on my property. I do not have as much cuttable wood on my property as what we cut on yours. Seriously. And like I said last night, you pointed out we've got those walnut trees, but they're all productive. I don't want to cut those
Right.
things.
No, no, no. Don't cut those down.
The only I'm finding some trees that are leaning over like they're not supposed to, or are broken off that I've got, and stuff like that. And unfortunately, that cottonwood and the willow that I've got back there is not a hardwood. It burns good, but it burns
Mhm.
fast. So
Fast, yeah.
I'm gonna have to cut a lot more wood than what I had last year because I went through all the hardwood that was down on the ground. we're running out of time. Actually, we actually ran out of time in the conversation. So this is our third Zoom meeting here this evening. Uh, Tag, before we go, do you got anything going on this next week? Anything important that people need to know about?
Yeah, just another homestead rotation. By the way, I've gotten some emails from some people that wanted to be added to the homestead rotation list,
Mhm.
people that want to come out and work. So I think that's absolutely fabulous. And but we'll have to talk to each individual homestead about how they feel about that.
Yep.
So I got that going on. I've been working in pod 4, doing some mudding and some taping, trying to get it kind of ready to go. I got to get a stove put in. I'm just trying to get back to it. I've been traveling between the Midwest Preparedness Project, Self Reliance Festival, which, by the way, I just got my speech, so I'll post it in a video coming up here pretty quick.
Well,
And then the Homestead Rotation, and then I got your head of Homestead Rotation. So I'm just really just trying to get back to it.
yeah, it was really cool. Mike from Indiana's wife contacted Yoda today,
Yeah,
and she wants to come out. She wants to partake in the canning class she's giving
yeah,
first weekend in November with
yeah,
Chris's group. So
yeah. He messaged me today. I liked him. He's a good guy.
yeah, I thought I liked everybody we met this weekend. I think that's probably the most solid reason to get on freesteading is looking what happened at your place this weekend
Yeah,
and seeing the interaction that happened. And it was all because of freesteading. Would not have happened any other way. You
yeah.
know.
Well, that's why I
So
built it. G. I mean, I built it because I think that community is just that important. And I was worried about lumping all the homesteaders together or whatever. But at the end of the day, I think the best thing we can do is just yoke up, as American Root says, and let's get busy getting busy, and we can help each other. I mean, think of the man hours it would have taken me by myself to put up all that wood.
oh yeah. And how many man hours did you come up with?
288.
288 man hours within an 8 hour period.
Yeah,
Yeah, how crazy is that?
288 man hours of doing nothing but chopping wood, milling wood, and cutting mulch.
Yeah, we're not gonna get that many man hours at my place, but we'll definitely get enough done to keep me good through the winter. I'm not gonna be out there in the middle of a snowstorm chopping and cutting wood unless I want to, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's a good thing. Well, I think the other thing that I want to say too is that, for those of you guys who are on YouTube, stick around. B and I go live here in just a little bit.
yeah, definitely. You guys go check out talk about
Mhm.
marathons. How long did you guys do last week? 2.5 hours?
Like 2 hours and 20 minutes, but it's funny. I never really set up and say I'm going to talk for this long, but as long as the conversation's going, I'm engaged and it's fun, and so I don't mind. I have no idea. It could be 20 minutes and it could be 2.5 hours. Who knows?
Yeah. Yoda and I try to keep ours to an hour. Although
Yeah.
this last time we read more comments, and I understand how you could do a 2.5 hour thing if you got that many
Yeah.
people commenting. I could easily see how it gets like that. Maybe
Well,
someday.
what I love a lot about it is all the side stories that are going on. Like the cinnamon rolls or just whatever. There's
Uh,
all these side little stories that are going on inside the live that just crack me up.
yep.
Make me smile. All through my week. So I really enjoyed a lot.
Sounds good, man. So we've got the rotation going on. Yoda's been cooking all week long and trying to get stuff ready so she can feed it everybody that's here. You know how she likes to put on a spread. Uh,
Hmm.
been getting ready for that, making videos, trying to get the for some reason the last week or so I've been trying to clean up the property. I've
Hmm.
got a I've got a year end review thing that I'm going to do, and I'm trying to get all the little bits and pieces that I should have picked up a month ago, trying to get
Hmm.
those taken care of. You know what I mean? So that's what I've been doing. That's probably what I'm going to be doing for the next week or two until I make that video. But other than that, just working on the homestead, got animals and all that stuff. So it's a daily grind with that. You know how it is with the chickens.
Yeah.
Had obnoxious goats and sheep on, and you
Yeah.
got you got a busy day.
Yeah.
All
Well, and
right.
I've got a side gig that I've been kind of working on that I'm not really going to talk a lot about, but I've got a big industrial project that's going on, and I'm talking about hundreds of millions of dollar project that I've been kind of helping with a little bit. That's been taking up some of my time, but I, how I am. I love stuff like that. The crazier the better. My book.
I got a side gig myself going on. Yoda's been working on her side gig, and I've got one coming up sometime in the beginning of November.
Mm.
That's going to help the bottom line. So it's
Yeah.
it's going to be good. It's going to be good. Folks, if you enjoyed this, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. Share it with somebody that you might find it interesting. If you want to see more of our material, hit that notification bell. Go over to Tag's place and watch his live tonight. Do the same thing there. Hit the thumbs up button. Hit the notification bell. If you're not sub if you're not a sub, um, and comment. The comments I'm finding the comments really enjoyable. I'm talking with people, even the ones that I disagree with, and the ones that are trolling. You know, I enjoy that stuff. I enjoy that. So do that. Tag, any last words?
Yeah, get rid of your emotional attachment to money. That will take you farther than anything will. So just go do that and you'll be all right.
You're not asking anybody to do anything easy, are you?
It's actually not that hard. Once you figure out it's just a tool like anything else.
This is true.
It's all it is. Don't have any love for it. It isn't any of those things.
My attachment to money since we moved out here has gotten way less than it used to be.
Yeah. Just get rid of the emotional tie, and it makes things a lot easier.
And most importantly, hold the line and go out and pursue a lifetime.
Live a lifetime.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Take care. Thanks, Tag.
See you, bud.
Thanks, Milo.